It was in the late 70s, during a freezing cold morning, a common occurrence here in Rio Grande do Sul, that this happened to me, and it left a lasting impression on me. At the time, I was a government employee, and sometimes I would stay working all night. On one of these nights, a colleague who had finished his shift asked for a ride home. He lived in a neighborhood far from where the office was located. When I returned, it was already late at night, and I parked my car in a parking lot where the spaces were marked out. The parking lot was located on a large plot of land surrounded by a zinc fence. Inside, it had a wooden fence as a physical divider, thus separating the two areas, the parking lot where I was, and another used for various services. The wooden fence did not cover the entire space, being about 30 centimeters above the ground, so that whoever was in the parking lot could see the feet of whoever was on the other side, and vice versa. So I got in the car, turned off the engine, and got out. As soon as I started walking toward the exit, I clearly felt that I was being watched. Where I had left the car, the street light was out, and I had to walk another 30 meters to reach another illuminated part of the lot. Instinctively, I looked at the dividing fence, realizing that someone was walking in the same direction as me, but on the opposite side. I found the company strange. Surely there should be no one in the area that had been deactivated due to the late hour. Intrigued and already getting nervous, I slowed down, hoping that the visitor would cross the illuminated streetlight before me, so that I could know who it was. When I stopped walking, he stopped on the other side too. I started walking again, but I confess that now I was starting to get disturbed by the anonymous follower. In the central part of the parking lot, the fence had a lack of continuity. Coincidentally, the lighting in this gap was reasonably good, and there I would certainly see the intruder in full body. As we got closer to the light, I noticed at a glance. I didn't turn my head directly, I just peeked, because he was careful to walk 2 steps behind. That is, we were never side by side, because he seemed to be stalking me, that there were not human feet, but the paws of a canine animal. I found the behavior of that animal strange. It seemed too rational. It never showed itself in front of me. It walked silently, hiding in the shadows and almost at the same pace as me. I finally reached the brightest point where there was a gap in the fence. I turned my neck and waited for him to appear. The first thing I really saw were 2 red eyes sparkling in my direction. I know that the eyes of canines and felines shine at night, but those shone with disturbing intensity. I felt a chill run down my spine and an uncomfortable feeling of fear. It was an incredibly black dog, large but not oversized, and its sparkling eyes were glued to me the whole time, as if it could guess my thoughts. It followed me along the other side of the fence, about 5 meters, and even the gap that allowed it to enter the parking lot. It did not do so, and continued to escort me, always a few steps behind. And when I looked in its direction, I was dazzled by the intense glow of those impressive eyes. Even when I left the parking lot and crossed the street toward my workplace, I did not have the courage to look back, because I could still feel its eyes on me. After that night, I kept thinking about the case, and I remembered that there were no houses in those surroundings, because I knew that area well. Where had that black dog with such intriguing behavior that accompanied and observed me throughout my journey come from, and what was it really? I know I will never know, but I have learned that in this world we are never truly alone. Supernatural phenomena are always around us. They just need the right moment to manifest. First of all, I would like to say that until this event, I had never seen or heard anything strange. I even joked that I am spiritually blind and deaf. My brother, on the other hand, has seen a lot of strange things. Well, my husband, my son, and I went to spend Carnival in Cabo Frio with my brothers. One beautiful night, I was alone at home. Everything was going normally when, at a certain point, the doorbell rang. The night was beautiful, and the moon lit up the entire path to the gate. It turns out that next to it, there was a tree that cast shadows over the place. When I was halfway there, my brother, who had rung the doorbell, remembered that he had the key and went in. He walked in front, my sister behind, her husband after, and finally a figure that I could see was female and had long hair down to her waist. I thought it was Ana Lucia, a friend of ours who had beautiful long hair. My brother came over to where I was, and I came back talking to him. My sister and brother-in-law passed me, but I didn't see Ana pass by, and I turned around to greet her. When I turned around, there was no one there. So I asked my brother, "Where's Anna?" To which he replied that he didn't know about her, that she wasn't with them. At that moment, I remembered something. Anna had cut her hair to her shoulders, and that person who had entered through the gate with my brother couldn't be her. And at the same time, she had disappeared. Who could the woman who entered through the gate with them be then? Where'd she come from? Where did she go, and what did she want by following everyone? I was frightened by that, and this fact was the first and only strange thing I've seen in my life, and I intend for it to stay that way. My brother even joked with me. Now you know how I feel. Thank you for listening to my story. I listened to the other stories on this channel and decided to tell one that happened to me when I was little. It happened when I was a little boy, growing up in a small town near the border between the states of Sao Paulo and Minas Gerais. I lived in a very small house with my family, and because of the lack of bedrooms, I shared my room with my sister. It was in this room that everything happened. One morning I woke up thinking it was going to be a beautiful day. I looked up and noticed a woman standing at the foot of my bed, completely enveloped in a strange darkness, with her hands on her hips. I could tell it was a woman by the shape of her body, because I couldn't see anything else. It was a completely black shape, including her face. The outline of her hair showed that it was tied up on her head like a bun. She seemed to be wearing a skirt, but the rest of the bottom was hidden by my bed. She just stood there, looking in my direction, without saying anything. Just one look at her made me fly under the covers. The whole time I was down there, I tried to calm down and try to imagine what it could be that I had just seen. After some time covered, I gathered the courage to stick my head out to see if she was still there. I slowly put my eyes out of the blanket to see her still standing there, in the same place, without moving, in the same position she was in before. And once again, I went under blanket. While all this was happening, my sister was sleeping. Her bed was parallel to mine, right to my right. While I covered the view of that visitor with the blanket, I tried to wake my sister by calling her. I didn't want to speak too loudly because it seemed like the best thing to do in that situation. My sister continued to sleep despite me calling her, so I decided it was time to do something more drastic. I got out of my bed and slowly crossed the room toward my sister's bed, covering the view of the specter with my hand. After all, I was pretty scared. My plan was to wake my sister up so she could see it and explain to me what that woman, completely dark, standing in front of my bed could be. Since I couldn't imagine what it could be, I thought she could explain it to me. I got to her bed without any problems and was about to wake her up when I decided to take a look to see if the apparition was still there. I would feel like a complete idiot if she woke up and there was nothing there. She was still standing there, just like before, except I could see that her face was turned towards where I was now. Even though I couldn't see her eyes, I knew she was looking at me. She had been looking at me since I got out of my bed until I got to my sister's bed. That really scared me, almost in a state of shock. The only thing I could do was jump back into my bed and get under the covers again. I didn't even wake my sister up, and I really regret that to this day. She was going to see it with her own eyes, and I let it slip because I was afraid. I stayed under the covers for a long time, all curled up and shaking. My mother came into my room after a while to ask me why it was taking me so long to get up, and why I was all wrapped up in the blanket. When I put my head out of the blanket, there was nothing there anymore, just my mother at the door of the room and my sister still sleeping. I never saw my morning visitor again. The event that I'm going to tell you about now really happened to me and was my worst experience with the supernatural. Many years after this happened, to my surprise, I was able to get reports from people who had also witnessed such an impressive phenomenon in similar situations. During the winter of 1987, when I was 10 years old, whenever I got home after school, I would run to see my grandmother who lived with us in our house. One time, as I always did, I went to my grandmother's room, where she was already in bed, and I knelt on the carpet next to her bed, near the headboard, talking, because I loved the stories she told me, especially the experiences of the afterlife that she had witnessed. It was already very late, past 11 p.m., It was very cold, and we had already talked a lot about various things when I felt something strange, as if someone was watching us. So automatically and without thinking, I glanced at the foot of her bed, and I could see something terrifying. It was as if a shadow had come to life. I could see, and I have this totally clear and sharp image in my head, as if it had just happened at this exact moment. It was a black figure. It had the shape of a very thin and tall man, completely skeletal, and he seemed to be kneeling at the foot of the bed with his hands resting on the bed, watching us. And when I looked at him, it was very strange, because he seemed to have realized that it had been discovered and immediately ducked and got under the bed. This happened in milliseconds, but it was enough for me to jump back and be completely frozen, taken by fear and without any reaction, while my grandmother, without knowing what had happened, spoke to me. I felt strong chills and repeated shivers running through my entire body, and I was absolutely unable to say anything. I tried to look under the bed, but I couldn't move at all. I finally managed to mumble that I was sleepy. I said goodbye to her, turned off the light, and went to my room next door. I lay down on my bed, but I couldn't sleep. I felt disturbed and distressed by that sinister image all night long. Despite being fully convinced of what I had witnessed, I immediately tried to get into my head that it was something produced by my imagination and nothing more. When the day was almost dawning and I was starting to fall asleep, around 6 a.m., I suddenly woke up to my sister screaming through the house, calling for my father. My sister, who was in charge of this daily task, had gone to bring breakfast with my grandmother's medicine and noticed that she seemed not to be well. It all happened very quickly, and before I knew it, my whole family was already in the hospital because my grandmother had just had a stroke and was between life and death. It was a huge shock for everyone, and I felt very guilty and bitter for having literally seen death stalking us and not having said anything to anyone. And this feeling lasted for a long time in my soul. My grandmother was hospitalized, We returned home and prayed a lot for her, and after a long period she recovered well and returned home. Many years later she passed away, leaving a lot of longing and precious life lessons. But whenever I remember her, this terrifying and macabre story inevitably comes to mind, which always leaves me very reflective and scared. Could that creature I saw at the foot of my grandmother's bed be death, want to take her? This happened in mid-January 2002, in a place I had been to 3 times before, always in the summer. It was a campground in the countryside of Sao Paulo, where I went with 2 friends. It was our second day there, and my friends and I were bored. The year before Janaina, Jessica and I had found a trail that went around a lake in the middle of the forest, and went around it, leading to the other side of the lake, but we didn't have the opportunity to explore it properly. During one of our breaks, the 3 of us decided that since it was our last year to go there, since we were at the age limit, it was our last chance to see where the trail that went around the lake ended. We went to the lake and found a bunch of kids playing with some canoes. Ignoring them, we found the trail and followed it to the other side of the lake. We thought there was no one else on that side of the lake, but we saw a bunch of younger girls coming out of a trail that went into the forest. We asked them if there was anything interesting there. They all said no, looked at the trail, waved goodbye, and left. I was curious, as were Janaina and Jessica, so we followed the trail. It went a little bit into the forest and ended at a kind of playground. It had a swing, a seesaw, a merry-go-round, and a net that went up to the platform. We messed around there a bit and took pictures of each other. We all climbed up onto the platform and took some pictures from up there, and then Jessica and I climbed down, leaving Janaina up there. She was having trouble getting down because she didn't want to step on any spider webs. While we were on the ground waiting for her to come down, we started hearing some strange things. First, I heard footsteps in the forest. 2 footsteps and stopped, then 2 more, and then stopped again. Then Jessica heard it. We told Janaina to come down faster. She came down and then came over to us. We stood there in silence for a while. Then we heard it again. 2 footsteps in silence. I was turning around trying to see where it was coming from, because it seemed so close. But there was nothing there, no birds, no animals, no people, nothing. We got out of there really quickly and went back to the clearing that surrounded the lake. For me, it was already too much adventure for one day, but Janaina and Jessica were feeling adventurous. There was no one else at the lake, so I figured people were already going back to lunch. I told them that maybe we should go back to lunch too. I was starting to feel a little panicky, but they both wanted to keep going. We found another trail that went into another part of the forest, further away from the camp, and we started following it. I really didn't have a good impression of this trail. The further we went into the forest, the worse it felt. We followed it until we found a pile of black garbage bags piled up on one side of the trail. We made some silly jokes and laughed a little nervously as we walked around them and continued following the trail. We came to a small clearing, and there we saw something very strange. On the right side of the clearing were 3 large cages in the shape of a half-ball. That's the only way I can describe it. We stood there looking at it and even took pictures. I was getting nervous and was almost begging Janaina and Jessica to go back to camp. They finally gave in, and we turned to go back to the trail. As we were leaving the clearing, we passed a tree that had caught my attention earlier. I had felt an uncontrollable fear when I had passed under it. This time I felt an uncontrollable urge to look up as we passed under it. I regret looking up to this day because I saw a man up there. He was only there for a few seconds, but I can remember him almost completely. He was wearing a red shirt and dark blue jeans. He had very short hair and was looking at us with a very menacing smile. I grabbed Janaina's arm really hard and said, "There's something up there." She replied, "I think we better get out of here." So we ran like 3 damned women and arrived at the lake already out of breath. I was ready to go back to camp when Jessica noticed that there was a fork in the trail we had just left. I was already shaking and really didn't want to go, but they did. I went ahead. I didn't want to be behind them, and so we continued on the trail. This trail was quite long and took us even further from the camp, too. Well, we had no idea where it was taking us. I was still getting chills and really bad feelings. After a while of going deeper and deeper into the forest, we started to hear laughter. Janaina thought we were hearing people at the camp, but that didn't seem right. We were quite far away. We had been walking for a long time in the opposite direction of the camp. We were quite far from where anyone would be, and it was children's laughter, not teenagers. Finally, Janaina and Jessica decided it would be best if we went back to the camp for lunch. I was so relieved to get out of the forest. I didn't tell them what I had seen in the tree until a long time later. And much later, months later, I talked to Jessica about the laughter we had heard, and we decided that there really must be something mysterious on the other side of the lake from that camp.